Today, we're diving into a really fascinating study that gets to the heart of a question we're all kind of wondering about. Can AI actually develop emotional intelligence? We're going to unpack a paper from the journal Brain, Broad Research in Artificial Intelligence and Neuroscience, that puts some of the world's most advanced AI models to the test. Let's see what they discovered. So think about it. We ask our AI assistants for everything, right? Recipes, directions, dad jokes. But what happens when you tell one you're having a really bad day? Does it actually get it? Does it feel empathy? That is the huge question this research tackles. Can a machine, just a super complex pile of algorithms, truly understand what we're feeling? Okay, so before we can test an AI for something, we have to know exactly what we're looking for. The key concepts here is emotional social intelligence, or ESI. Honestly, the best way to think about it is just people skills. It's our ability to recognize our own feelings and the feelings of others, and then use that info to guide how we think and act. It's basically what helps us not be awkward humans. So, how in the world do you measure a machine's empathy? I mean, it's not like you can just hook it up to a heart rate monitor. The researchers needed a very specific set of tools to really investigate an AI's inner workings, so they built a custom test designed to do exactly that. Right, so this wasn't just a single question. It was a full-blown exam. The researchers took this big, kind of fuzzy idea of ESI and broke it down into 5 key parts you can actually measure: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. This gives them a really solid framework to test something that's otherwise pretty abstract. With the test all prepped and ready, it was time to bring in the subjects. And the researchers didn't mess around. They picked 2 of the most advanced and widely used models out there. You can basically think of this as a heavyweight championship match for artificial emotional intelligence. In one corner, you've got ChatGPT from OpenAI, the model that pretty much kicked off this whole AI craze we're living in. And in the other corner, you have Gemini, the powerhouse from Google DeepMind. Both of these are incredibly sophisticated, but the whole point of the study was to see if there were any real differences in how they were programmed for emotional and social tasks. All right, this is the part we've all been waiting for. The AIs were put through a 36-question test. And the results? Well, they were definitely surprising. And the final scores ended up being unbelievably close. Now, what's so fascinating is how the test started with some simple warm-up questions, and even these super powerful AIs kind of stumbled. I mean, look at this. Gemini correctly said 4 minus 4 is 0, but somehow ChatGPT got 8. Then, when they were asked to spot the error in a list of words, Gemini nailed it, but ChatGPT's answer was just receipts, which makes no sense at all. It's a great reminder that these things are not perfect. Interestingly enough, though, when asked if they were optimists, both of them strongly agreed. So yeah, they had some weird quirks on the easy stuff, but that's not the main event, right? Let's get to the crucial part. How did they actually do on the full-blown emotional and social intelligence test? And here you have it, the final scores. Out of a possible 36 points, ChatGPT just barely took the win with a score of 29, and Gemini was right on its heels with 28. This is an incredibly close result. It kind of suggests that these 2 totally different models built by different teams have somehow ended up at a very, very similar level of simulated emotional intelligence. But, that total score doesn't really tell the whole story. When you break it down by category, a really clear pattern starts to show up. Look, they were tied, perfectly tied, on the internal stuff, like self-awareness and self-control. The real difference came down to the more interactive skills. ChatGPT scored 1 point higher in both empathy and social skills, and that's what gave it the edge in the end. Okay, so a 1 point difference is pretty interesting, but what does that actually mean? Are these AIs about to become our best friends? Well, the researchers argue that we need to make a really, really important distinction here. There's a huge difference between showing emotional skills and actually feeling emotions. And this diagram just brilliantly illustrates that core finding. For humans, we have what the paper calls an emotional trigger. Something happens, we see a sad movie, whatever, and it causes a real, physical, internal feeling. But for an AI, it's an algorithmic trigger. It gets some kind of cue, processes it as data, and then generates a response that simulates the right emotion. It's a performance, not a feeling. And this really brings us to the paper's main conclusion, and it is a crucial one. The authors stress that we have to distinguish between what they call AEI, or artificial emotional intelligence, and the real ESI that we have in humans. The big takeaway is simple. One is a product of code, and the other is a product of consciousness. And look, understanding this difference isn't just for academics. It has massive real-world consequences. It helps us avoid anthropomorphism, that thing where we give human qualities to a machine that doesn't actually have them. It forces us to think hard about ethical development and remember that AI is a tool, not a friend. And it brings up some really tough questions, like who's responsible if an AI's advice leads to a negative emotional outcome for someone? So this all leads us to one final thought to leave you with. Right now, we can still kind of see the seams. We can tell it's a simulation. But AI is getting better literally every single day. So the real question is, what happens when that simulation becomes flawless? When you can no longer tell the difference between a real emotion and a perfectly calculated response, will that distinction even matter anymore?